Hey guys, I wanted to talk about a little bit of news that came out recently about an outage that was in many of Google's services all at the same time. Turns out that Google has come out and talked about exactly what went wrong in this situation, and I think it's really interesting because it shows a lot about what systems that they use, what methodology they're using to do migrations, and it's just really interesting stuff. So, first off, let me give the premise here. So, Google experienced an outage that had Gmail, YouTube, Google Drive, and a bunch of other services that basically any Google service where you have to be logged in to be able to use it. And now the outage was only for an hour, but when you think about it, an hour-long outage for, uh, you know, billions of people is kind of a big deal. And Google doesn't go down like this often at all. And when they usually do, it's usually isolated, like another instance on the same day that I'll talk about in a minute. But what's interesting is Google has come out and shared more information about why they went down and what happened. And it's it's funny because all the news articles come out and they say, "Oh, Google blames it on their user identity system," and then when you actually dig into the details, yeah, sure, it was the user identity system, but it was a very specific part of the identity system. So, and now I have to put a disclaimer here. I don't know all of the infrastructure that Google runs on or how they work. And so I'm making some assumptions based on what these articles that I've read and studied up on. I'm making assumptions on that. So disclaimer right there. But there's some things that you need to know about a user system. You have data that needs to be stored. And what happens is when you create a session, that session gets recorded somewhere in a database. And you could be talking to hundreds of different servers throughout a given day because Google has hundreds of different servers, and all of them need to be consistent in the information that they give back to you. And so one way that the user identity system makes sure that they are consistent with each other is they use an algorithm called Paxos. Now, if you're not familiar with Paxos, that's okay. I can talk a little bit about that, and it's something that I've been studying lately. So I'm not an expert on it, but I am definitely interested in it. Okay, the core element of this user identity service that actually failed was a Paxos system. So they have a database or a distributed set of servers that have data that's stored about your user IDs and the sessions that you create when you log into Google. And sometimes it's not even on login. It's like when you visit one of their products like YouTube, you visit YouTube, it talks to the identity service, it creates a new session for you that says, yes, he's logged into YouTube and this is the token that you should use. The Paxos system will then add that token to a data log, and that data log gets distributed among many servers that are all in that Paxos cluster. Okay, so what happens is Paxos keeps everybody up to date, they're in sync. Now, it sounds like Google is moving from one type of infrastructure to another, or they're running on the same infrastructure, but they have systems that maintain and keep track of the scale that they need for different times of day or different parts of the world. And so they have a quota system that says, here's how much this user identity service is allowed to write to our storage, or here's how much RAM they're allowed to use at a given time. And it tracks their quota. So what happened is their old system was incorrectly reporting a number that was zero usage of the quota. And then the new system was reporting a certain size of the quota. And when or they had turned on the new system in October, but they had this feature switch that basically said, okay, but ignore this. Give them some leeway on this quota. And then when they turned on that quota for real and tried to enforce that quota, what happened was the incorrect value and the correct value, they were inconsistent, and then the system, the Paxos system, couldn't write any more data to the storage layer. And so when it stopped being able to write to the storage layer, all of the tokens that were being given out were out of date, or they were incorrect, or you can still create a token, but you can't write it to the storage. And so that token is expired by default. The Paxos system doesn't know about it, doesn't remember giving that token out, and so you couldn't log in. So this caused an outage across all of the systems that needed user IDs, and that's a lot of Google stuff. And that's kind of a big deal. But I think it's funny that the articles talk about the user identity system being the problem, when really it was a quota system running, managing the user identity system. So it was an infrastructure problem, not the identity problem. And that's a funny little tweak in the wording there. So pay attention to some of these articles. I'll link them in the description below. I'd love to hear your comments about it, and if you're an expert on Paxos, I'd love to hear more about it, and maybe we can get a chance to talk. In another instance for Google, on the same day, and as far as I can tell, it sounds like it's unrelated, Gmail went down not for everyone. It went down for a handful of users, and I don't know how many, but it was down for them for about 7 hours. And what happened was, it's a configuration problem. The service got set up, and it's an SMTP protocol handler. So SMTP, Simple Mail Transport Protocol. And so the server itself can take messages coming in that say, hey, this email address is who I'm trying to send the message to. It knows how to route it to the right server or store it, or, I'm no expert on emails, obviously. What happened is they configured the SMTP server for the wrong domain name. And so these people who were assigned to this server, or group of servers, when somebody sent an email to them, it would come and say, oh, I don't know this email address because the domain name's not the same. And so it would return a, not deliverable. This email address doesn't exist. And so for about 7 hours, anybody's email, getting that system or hitting that part of the system gets returned. Now, what I find interesting about this particular outage is, I've implemented services where if I send an email and I get a non-deliverable back, I then blacklist that email, or I put it into a list of emails that I should never send to. And so the reason I do that is because I'm trying to keep my email service in good standing with other email services. One way that we have protection from spam, in order to not be, marked as a spammer, I record the email addresses that I send to that fail. And so I store that into a list I never send to them again. And so for these 7 hours, I need to go back and clean out that list of email addresses that I sent to. And I imagine that many other people who sent emails to those individuals may think that those addresses are not serviceable emails. And so it'll be interesting. Maybe that protects these people from getting email. Maybe it makes it so they don't get the emails that they need. I know that's a major issue if you're trying to sign in and you need to reset your password, but their system thinks that you don't have a valid email. You'll never get that reset password, and so there needs to be ways around that. So it's an interesting thing to think about. I think people who send emails should be aware of that outage, or more aware than I was. It was brought to my attention a few days after the fact, and so I imagine a lot of people aren't aware of that either. So double check, for different system outages, and look for that. So you can probably find a lot of email addresses that you've sent to that failed that are actually good email addresses. So that's all I have today. I thought that was interesting, and yeah, I look forward to the next one.